Throughout the course of human evolution, we've thrived from our ability to innovate and outsmart the competition in our surroundings. However, mankind has a new enemy, one that we just cannot seem to outdo. Ourselves. For the past half-century, systemic chronic illness has plagued our growing population. 40 years of dietary guidelines put in place to help our sickening society have failed. Could it be that the nutritional information we've been fed was built on lies? Food lies. Well, today on the Road to Recovery podcast, we are going to be talking to engineer and filmmaker Brian Sanders, whose own health journey was the inspiration for his upcoming feature-length documentary, Food Lies. Brian is also the host of the Peak Human podcast, a health-centered approach to treating disease with food. Works as a health coach at Evolve Healthcare and co-founded the health education company Sapien. In an effort to spread awareness of regenerative agriculture and increase access to well-raised animal products around the world, he has started the company Nose to Tail, which is now embarking on a journey to bring back ancestral eating to tribes in Africa with his movement, Cows for Kids. Moo. So what are the food lies? Where did society's nutritional guidelines go wrong? And how can looking at our ancestors' eating habits shape a better future for us all? And hey, if you are enjoying the podcast, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the amazing guests that we have coming up on the show. It's gonna be some good times. Welcome, Brian Sanders, here to tell us today what the hell is up with our food and why it's lying to us. So now people may not know a lot about your background. You haven't always been sort of a food guru, or on this podcast, a food-a-roo. You were actually an engineer prior to doing what you do now in filmmaking. So I kind of wanted to start just where this whole new adventure into filmmaking and the genesis of your podcast, your film Food Lies, and where this whole journey for you kind of began and why.
It goes back about 6 years. 7 years is right when I turned 30, kind of. And it's also when I basically lost both my parents to these modern chronic diseases. And we lived a healthy lifestyle. We followed the food pyramid. We ate the low-fat foods and the lean meats and the chickens and the whole thing. And they ended up with insulin problems with undiagnosed. They just gained weight as they age, had all this stuff going on, and then Alzheimer's and cancer. And now I'm 30, I have no parents. I changed my own health. I actually saw some of my friends go more into this like kind of Marxian approach, primal, paleo, getting rid of these processed foods. They changed their body, changed their life, and I just joined in and found the same results. I easily, changed my entire body composition without trying, without counting calories or anything, and just kept going down this rabbit hole, and eventually decided to make the film Food Lies about all this stuff and how many food lies there are out there. And we just have this so wrong, this paradigm of our that we're told by the government, the guidelines, just every news outlet, where you turn, it's just propaganda, bad advice, food industry advice. I just needed to make a film about it. So that's what I started doing 3.5 years ago. And we're kind of done filming and we're in post-production.
I think everyone can agree who's watched this podcast or your Peak Human podcast or Food Lies or any of this stuff can agree that the standard American diet is just a mess. Like, it all starts, we could go back to Ansel Keys, who you talk a lot about, and his 7-country study, which is a very flawed study that I've talked about a lot in the podcast. Various cultures that were explored by Weston Price. I know I'm rambling at this point, but you visited some of these cultures that we'll talk about a little bit. Podcast, the Hadza, the Maasai, with another friend of yours, Mary Ruddock, who will also be a guest here on the podcast in a couple weeks. So that'll be very exciting. But during this film of yours, Food Lies, what has been some of your biggest discoveries that to you were just like turned your own mindset of stuff upside down?
Yeah, I definitely had that. It's been a journey, and I'm glad that it's taken this long to make the film. If I got the film out like really quickly, I don't think it would be that great. And I would have had sort of these old ideas or, it's always evolving. And yeah, I like everything that you said. Yeah, we need to look at all these things. We need to look at all the different cultures around the world and look at our human history, and where we went wrong in the last 100 years is a very important part of the story. Yeah, Ansel Keys is going to be a big part of the film. Weston Price is going to be a big part of the film. And we went to Africa to study where we came from, which is the beginning of the film. We're starting with the evolutionary story. When we talk about what humans should eat, we need to know, what did we eat and what is our body suited for. And it's been millions of years of evolution, and there's pre-humans, and there's all these different pre-human lines that led to us, and that's on the scale of millions of years. And we're talking about 100 years, which is a laughable little speck. And everything we know about food is from this little 100-year window, or this is 10-year window. Go one more order of magnitude down. People don't know 100 years ago. They don't know what their great grandparents ate. The great or even one more great grandparents would have been eating natural foods, and they wouldn't have had seed oils or tons of sugar, and they wouldn't have had tons of like fortified, refined grains and flours and all this type of stuff. They would have some of that, but it would be, they wouldn't be soaked with Roundup from Monsanto, and they would have made it themselves probably, and they would have been eating animal foods. They would have never thought meat was bad for them. They would be like, well, what do you mean? I work all week so that I can afford meat because it's a highly nutritious food. Yeah, back to the Africa story. We need to see where we came from, and the best window we have into that is the modern native living people, right? There's a few of these tribes left, and we went to Tanzania and Uganda, and we spent almost 3 weeks, learning from them, hunting with them, eating with them. And yeah, Mary was amazing. She came along. I'm glad you're having her on as well. I look forward to working more with Mary. We're trying to just keep spreading the word, and actually we're doing Cows for Kids. That's a cool thing.
I was going to mention that.
We can mention that later, but yeah, we're just helping these tribes get animals. Part of the story that we saw there is they were amazingly healthy, and then as they started getting these modern foods, they became less healthy. And as some of these people, especially in Uganda, the pygmies, well, they're been kicked out of their forests. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's crazy. They used to live in the forest, getting animals, getting foods, and then they were kicked out by the government, and now they don't have access to animal foods. So that's what the Cows for Kids is helping them get back animal foods into their diet. Same thing with the Maasai, at least get them some milk and some, well, if they choose to use blood, I mean, that's what the Maasai do, right? They'll get the blood from the animal. And yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start. We could start the Hadza. The Hadza were very interesting. They are a famous group because they still go out and hunt and gather. They are out there with their bows and arrows, and they're getting food each day, and that's all they do. And the women, can dig up some tubers or find some plants, but the men are out there hunting. And we went on the hunt with them, and we got a couple animals, and they brought them back, and they opened them up, and they had their little tools, and they did not wash their hands. They did not sterilize anything. They weren't wearing masks. They weren't using gloves. They were just, one with nature, one with the dirt. And we got to eat. We had a little dik-dik. It's a small deer-like animal, and they opened it up for us. We ate the liver raw. They cut it up. There was all kinds of weird stuff going on, intestinal things and different things, and the large intestine and small intestine and greens and browns, and we were just eating all of them. It was just part of it. The experience was to eat this raw liver, and then they cooked everything for us, and we ate some more of the animal, and we ended up eating the brain as well, which was really tasty. Actually, it just tastes like nothing. It was like kind of this pudding. And so that's just how they live. And these are the healthy people. I mean, this particular group was exposed to a lot of tourists, and they got a lot of treats and snacks, and they had kind of like messed up teeth, and it could be partly because all this fluoride and in the water. There's different theories you can read about, but even despite having tons of snacks and treats that tourists would bring, they're very healthy, and they just sort of live long and die.
Yeah,
And that's kind of the story. Yeah.
I think something that was really interesting when you guys were talking about your experience with the Hadza and the Maasai and the various tribes that you both visited was the kind of contrast between coming from the same sort of people living within the city to the actual tribes and how they live themselves, and just the health disparity difference.
Yeah, that was the main takeaway. That was a story that I saw. These people were super healthy. The older generations lived way longer, and they would always tell stories, each group we were with, about how the new generations aren't living as long. They're getting sick. They're getting joint problems and problem like type 2 diabetes, maybe if they really, move to the city or adopt a Western life. And when they stuck to their native diet, they didn't have these. And it was striking because they couldn't quite put it together though. Some of the people like the Maasai elder we talked to he's like didn't trust foods that lasted a long time, and he didn't trust these new oils, so he didn't know why. This guy he's not reading the literature. He's not listening to Peak Human. He's just knows that it's like, well, why would he use this oil that's in a jug, or why do we want to use this oil or flour that can sit on a shelf forever when we traditionally eat foods that will spoil and that are, it spoils for a reason. I mean, you should choose your foods based on how long, how short a time they would spoil in, because that means it's fresh and probably nutritious. I mean, it's not like this hard and fast rule, but it is a very good indicator is if your food is going to go bad soon, that means it's fresh and nutritious and it's good for you. So they kind of figured this out, but some of the people couldn't quite figure out the connection, and this kind of Western medicine propaganda has anti-meat, propaganda has crept in. And so they were telling us, they're like, hey, so they tell us this whole story. We interview them. Oh man, we used to eat meat all day, every day. We would catch it in the forest, and
they think they're doing a good thing, right?
Yeah, and they're doing this whole thing and talking about how important it was to them, and then they're also telling us how the new generations aren't doing well. But then they're saying, oh, but now our doctors are telling us about saturated fat and how meat is bad for you. And I'm like, what? It's getting out to you? You're out in this village in the middle of Tanzania, and they're getting the same message that we've gotten for the past, 60 years about this bogus idea about, you just eat cholesterol and it just goes into your arteries and clogs them. It's just that's not how it works.
It's kind of like we've all had our blinders on to just the painfully obvious. And if you really kind of think of food in a common sense sort of way, which is kind of what you're all about with your sapien diet, it's kind of obvious what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. But I think one thing that was really interesting to me is that I saw a podcast with Tim Spector. I think it was on Dr. Gundry's podcast. And he was talking about Western culture, how it's very different from all these tribes, the Hadza and all this stuff. And one thing that you hear about when you Google, if you were to like Google hunter-gatherer tribes, what they ate, it says like they eat like 100 to 150 grams of fiber a day. Tim Spector, said he visited the Hadza and they were eating loads and loads of fiber.
Eating a very natural, very diverse diet and masses of fiber, supplemented with, bits of meat when they fancy it. And
I just found that contradictory to your and Mary's experience. What was your experience with kind of those tribes as far as their day-to-day dietary habits?
No, this is really important. And I don't want to say that I know everything about the Hadza, though.
Right.
I want to start off because actually there's a researcher named Herman Ponzer who wrote a couple books and studies the Hadza. And someone called me out and tagged him on Twitter. And now I was going to interview him. And now he doesn't want to do an interview with me anymore. He thinks that I think I know everything about the Hadza because when I visited them, they did not eat any plant foods or fiber. The men were just eating meat all day, and that's all they ate was meat. And then the women, they told us they gave the women meat and they were eating some kind of leaf, but they only had access to this one type of leaf. It was like a pumpkin leaf, right? Like the top of the pumpkin that they got from some patch or something. So that's all I saw them eating. I saw another group eating some tubers, but they were very rough. There was a lot of roughage, right? It was just pure fibrous, like the most fibrous things ever, and they would chew on them and then spit out the fiber. So they were just extracting, basically glucose. They're just getting some starch from the tubers and then spitting out the fiber. And then, they would get some meat from the men go hunt it. In my experience, I'm not saying I'm an expert, and this is the one, there's two groups we went to, and we only spent a few days with them. That's what I saw. I mean, apparently I read Herman Ponzer's book, and he was out there doing some things with them for extended periods, and they were gathering tons of stuff. But this is not what I saw. And they did not care about like the fallback foods, these tubers. They cared about meat and animals, and that's all they cared about and what they were after every day. And then that's what they ate. They sat around the fire and they just ate them nose to tail. They ate the brains, like I said, they ate the liver, the whole thing. They were chewing on the bones. They were getting every little bit of it. There was no time for fiber. And so, in my opinion, and in my brief experience, I think that there are these huge myths going around about them, that there is this plant-based narrative. There is bias in science, and the researchers do come in with a bias, and then they, without knowing it and without trying, you don't want to. I'm biased too. Like, I think meat's healthy, and so all my stuff's are based around that. But I think I have a lot of evidence for that. But I do have a bias. So I went there, and that's what I saw. I saw them eating meat, but I don't know. Maybe secretly they were, had like oatmeal in their back pocket and I didn't see it. I don't know. I know thousands and thousands of people in the world these days that don't eat any fiber and are doing great and reversing diseases and doing all kinds of stuff. There's, a big carnivore community now doing this. So, and this is real. I mean, yes, like these Hadza, they do know more about it and they can find it, but I don't think they relied on it. I mean, you have to think of year round too. There wasn't always access to these foods, and there is a dry season, and we were in the wet season and we walked around and it was amazing. It was green everywhere. It was amazing. And the guide was telling us, hey, this is a barren wasteland in the dry season. Like, you can't get anything, but you can find animals. Right. So this fiber, I don't know. I think fiber myth is huge. It's such I don't know, something we need to just get over. I don't think humans need a ton of it. Maybe you can need a little bit of it or choose to have a little bit, but you can get the same benefits from just fat, like, or collagen, or eating the different parts of the animal. Or I say fat because ketones, they can break down into the same as like butyric acids that can feed your gut the same way fiber does. So you don't need fiber. Like, humans for all of history have been fasting too. We haven't always had food. So where do you get your fiber when you're fasting? You know what I mean? It's like, obviously the body has systems to protect itself and work without food. And so that's what happens with ketones. When you're fasting, even if you're not, fat adapted or keto, you will start producing ketones if you fast for long enough, because that's just what happens. So yeah, fiber's not necessary. And I think the microbiome part that people get caught up in, well, guess what? They're eating, like I said, dirt, guts, all this different stuff. I mean, I think that's what sadly is being mistaken for the benefits. And it's not the fiber, it's all this other stuff they're doing. They're not using Purell.
Interesting to talk about when you were there visiting the tribes in Africa. And this is something I'll ask Mary about too, with her, visits to Greece and stuff like that in the blue zones, is kind of the way we treat our food. I feel like we're detached from the food we eat. It's kind of like an item. I'd be curious to know what your experience was or observation was with the way that they looked at the food they eat.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I asked them more questions about that specifically, but they wouldn't even know what I was talking about. If we try to ask them like, oh,
they don't have the contrast.
Yeah. Cut a meat in a store. They'd be like, that's absurd. Well, I don't get it. But yeah, they definitely were connected with their food. Yes. It was a whole experience. I mean, they knew everything about how to get the food and why they eat this food or how to prepare it. And I mean, they are just one and the same. They were just integrated into the system, and we are the exact opposite. And I do think it's a huge part about what's going wrong in society. So yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because I didn't talk to them about it, but I could observe that they were connected. And of course, that's why they didn't have any opinions that it was bad. Or, the only opinions they did have when we talked to people who were more, in touch with the Western society, like this elderly Maasai leader, he knew, he spent some time, and he did have these ideas that, like I said, the things on the shelf are not good. Like, why would we want these foods that can just last forever? And that disconnection is big with, I think, why vegans even exist. It's that they're disconnected from the food system, so they don't know that that's how animals have to die. This is just part of the system. This is, what's been going on forever. This is part of nature. And when you're disconnected and you can buy a piece of meat in a package and you don't have to think about it, then you start developing these ideas that we shouldn't have to kill something to live, but that's impossible. And that they don't know that to do all the crops, the monocrops, and all this plant agriculture, and ship it in from around the world and destroy entire ecosystems to grow this food, that there's tons of death. And so, you can try to ignore it, and maybe you can go one step removed from the death, right? So that's all they are doing, is getting one step removed from it.
Yeah.
They're not escaping the system. And so if you're more connected to it, you have to confront. I mean, it's a good thing to confront the reality that something has to die for something to live, and that omnivores do that. And you can have more respect for that process. And I think it's a more evolved state to be in, to try to not just ignore it and think you're going around it.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of weird, but this is kind of why I get confused by the whole vegan movement and saving the world by not eating meat and all this stuff. But I think that for me would be like the most interesting observation, if I were to say visit the Hadza, would be to kind of just observe their relationship with the kill, and kind of the interactions with the tribe, and kind of that. I think it kind of creates a sense of community, around the food, if that makes sense. But that's just my observation from double removed from watching
Well,
any
that's
YouTube
all
videos.
that's all they have. That's
Yeah.
all they have. Like, what are they doing throughout the day? They're acquiring food. Like, humans only have a few things to do to live, right? It's like your shelter, and you have your relationships, and which can include procreation, or like raising children and all that, and then it's food. And so all they do all day is think about these three things, and they have the other two taken care of. It's with pretty much ease. They build their shelters and have their families, and then they just care about food.
Yeah.
And it is everything, and it's all they think about and care about, and all they do. And they sit around the fire and talk about the next kill. What are we gonna eat next? How tasty this is, or that. That's all they do.
See, in the US, I could see them calling that an eating disorder, which I think would be pretty interesting. Speaking of relationships with food, and kind of that eating disorder mentality, a year ago, you did a podcast with, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, Mark Schatzker. Yeah, who wrote the book, The Dorito Effect, and several other books. But I found that really interesting, because we just kind of got done talking about the Hadza and kind of their relationship with food, and the Maasai and their relationship with food. And we also have a relationship with food here. And something you discussed in a podcast with him, I think it was about the book Dorito Effect, was the way we've figured out how to synthesize, so adding in natural flavorings. I just kind of wanted to talk to you about how different in general, even the whole foods we eat today are from what they would have been, say, in our pre-grandparents' time, hundreds of years ago, kind of thing, because of the way we've monocropped things and genetically modified even whole foods, and now started creating fake foods to taste like real foods. And that's why we get confused when it comes to diet. What's the right diet? I feel like we've lost that instinct of just how to eat. And that's why we get caught up in having to count calories or macros and all this crap. We should just know how to do it instinctively, but we don't.
Yeah, or eating disorders. And this is all because of going away from that and eating real foods. If you didn't have the food industry, you wouldn't have eating disorders, counting calories. Well, you wouldn't need even diet plans. You wouldn't need any of this stuff. We would just be people who instinctively knew how to eat. But It's all about the processing of food and the food industry. And that's what his book is essentially about, is the processing of food ruined everything. And especially with the fake flavors and just like the newest techniques that trick your body. So humans, and like other animals, I mean, there's great research. Fred Provenza is a guy that studies animals, and they instinctively know what types of grass or roughage to eat based on nutrient needs. And they've done tests to show this, that if you're deficient in this, magnesium, they would find plants that happen to have magnesium and go eat them. And, they can study this, and it's amazing. Right. And then I think humans have that same capability. We just have kind of lost it, or don't really know, especially because our, flavors and taste buds have been hijacked. But that's another thing I saw with the Hadza and the Maasai and these people. They didn't use seasonings. They didn't have seasoning. They didn't even use salt. They just ate the animal straight, and they weren't interested in salt. So the Maasai weren't interested in salt. Like if you would give them salt, they wouldn't even want it. Well, because they're drinking blood, they're getting their electrolytes, and they don't need it. And there's just something about their palate that's just more refined, maybe, or they just can taste it and they know. And I think they've kept these instincts alive because they haven't hijacked their taste buds with all this. Not that salt's bad, right? Salt is great, but they just don't need it because they're getting it elsewhere. Or you don't need as much, I think, if you're just eating the right diet, right? We're kind of like depleting all of our nutrients by eating all these processed foods, and so they don't do that. And they know how to eat. They are in tune with what nutrients they need. If someone's craving a certain food, they probably crave it for a reason. Pregnant women, they're like, oh, they want more liver, or maybe they want more beef, and because they need that iron or that B12 or something that's in that. And so we kind of know that. So I always say, if you're craving a real food, then it's probably for a reason. If you're craving a modern food, I wouldn't listen to that craving. So I think we still do have some of that intuition left, unless it's, if you're craving Taco Bell and Doritos, that's a wrong thing, because everyone wants to eat ice cream and sweets. But if you're craving liver, is maybe you have a deficiency in a mineral, and you would get it from that. So the depletion of the nutrient content is Mark Schatzker also talks about, right? It's like the way we do the monocropping, and the nutrients are very depleted in the soil, and therefore the plants, and then therefore the animals. So this whole thing with this whole modern system is we deplete out the nutrients from plant and animal food, and then we add back in fake flavors that try to trick our taste buds into making us think that it is nutritious, but it's not. So that's a huge problem. I love that paradigm of, man, you've tricked your brain into thinking you're getting nutrients because robust flavors would signify that this food had good nutrition in it. And now he likes to use a chicken example, that the chicken in the past was delicious and flavorful, and you didn't season it with a million things. Now the only way people eat chicken is deep fried and battered and slathered in sauces and seasonings and all this stuff. And the chicken is actually really plain tasting because it has no nutrients anymore.
And these are all things, by the way, that I know you explore in your film, which I think is going to be really interesting to kind of see your perspective in all the interviews that you have integrated into the documentary, because I think that's going to be fluid, kind of concise way of getting this message across, hopefully, to people. But you've kind of coined the term sapien diet. So you could just explain for anyone that doesn't know what like your idea of the sapien diet is, and then how someone could like potentially put that into easy practice.
So I've developed it along the way on this 6 or 7 year journey. And I think, to me, it just means how humans should eat. It's not something I invented per se. It's like, this is a diet for Homo sapiens, and it's based on every factor I can think of, like human history up to modern science. Like, just, there is sort of a fallacy where you could just say, just because our ancestors did it doesn't mean it's correct. Right? That is a fallacy, to just because it's like they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, maybe 95% of what they were doing was correct, and they developed it over time and through trial and error and observation. But just because they did it doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. But now we have tons of modern science and studies, and we can verify this. So I think it's all been verified. And what it is basically a whole foods diet, and it's an animal-based whole foods diet. And it doesn't necessarily have to be animal-based, but many people find that the best way. And I think by calories, a lot of people will be animal-based anyway. If you get rid of processed foods, like the most processed foods have all the calories in them, like the sugar and the refined grains and these oils. If you take those out of your diet, that's a lot of empty calories disappearing. And then no matter what kind of whole foods diet you eat, you're probably going to be getting most of your calories from animal foods.
Yeah.
If you're doing it right. And so that's the highest level view of what sapien is. And then we can, you can do it based on your personal tastes or your background or the seasons, or, you can get down into the weeds from there. And there's a spectrum of toxicity of plant foods, and there's anti-nutrients, and a lot of people don't know about them. But you could go to vegan websites that talk about anti-nutrients. I think it's funny to go to a vegan website and they talked about how bad oxalates are, and spinach and kale and all these things, and they're talking about don't eat these all the time, don't eat them every day, watch out for these oxalates. Like even vegans know about these anti-nutrients.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We had Sally Norton on the podcast not too long ago. So we got all into the nitty gritty with oxalates, and just looking back at just my own diet, I was like an oxalate hound. I was pounding spinach, like almond milk, almonds. And I mean, it was all in the guise of like trying to be healthy. I mean, I think most people sometimes run into trouble, not because they think they're like knowingly doing the wrong thing. I mean, sure, if you're eating junk food all the time, you probably know at your heart, you're not doing the right stuff. But a lot of people get into trouble by trying to do the right thing, but they're just misguided. So they're like doing all these juicing things and all this crazy stuff in excess. And I think that's kind of the major issue, is just the excess part of it. And that could be like whatever dietary paradigm you align yourself with, is that I do think balance does matter. I think you can overdo it doing a lot of different things.
No, balance matters. The problem is this moderation stuff has been hijacked by like Coca-Cola. And so it does, I am kind of turned off by that term, but
I am too.
Right. No, but it is true. There is a balance to nature in general, and you eat differently depending on the season, and that, yes, like you can't just, so it in fact balances itself. It should, if you're eating with the season and the foods change. And like you said, it's the overabundance. I did it too. I was drinking these kale shakes with almond milk and spinach and all this stuff, and doing it every single day for years. And then I realized that's not evolutionary program. That's not what my body wants. That's bad. And so, don't buy into this propaganda about moderation. Oh yeah, just drink a Coca-Cola and or 5, and then just work out a lot.
Point out is a lot of people are trying to just help people. They're just a little misguided along the way.
Well, no, that's what the whole thing is wrong with society, is the misinformation about all this stuff. Is most people are trying to be healthy that are actually focusing on it. They just have the wrong information. That's the whole point of why I have to make a film called Food Wise.
Exactly. When it comes to synthetic fake food, I don't really think there's a ton of room for moderation. It's not going to kill you to eat some pizza like once every month or a couple months or whatever you're doing, but like every day is definitely not going to be helpful. No,
the moderation talk is a whole rabbit hole you could get into too, because I completely agree. And then I do eat pizza once in a while.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different idea of moderation than other people's idea of moderation. So that's a big point you're making. Yes. People think that it's okay to just eat just like snacks and treats and desserts and junk food just once, but it's like, oh, I only had it this one meal. But it's like, oh, and then I only had my one coffee this morning from Frappuccino. There's part of that message. A treat used to be a treat. I had this old Instagram graphic I put up, and a treat, you'd have pie like on a Sunday because your mom or your grandma, back in the day, they'd take the time to make a pie, and they make it from scratch, and you'd have the one pie. You wouldn't, that's a treat. Right? Yeah, fine, eat the pie, but that was once a week. Now people want to treat every day. People have like 3 treats per day. If we're just labeling, treat as this term, it's like, well, it's like this coffee, and then it's this. Even if they're healthy, They're like, oh, I'm going to eat this granola bar. It's so healthy. No, that's a treat. That's like a just pure sugar processed food. So people need to know that a treat used to be a treat. There's so many things. Like I could probably say 10 things are the thing, you know? But it's like it's all together. It's just the modern way we live is the thing. And modern way we live equals processed foods, equals treats nonstop. It equals, you know, a million other things.
Let's take a turn a little bit and talk about something that I think is kind of dear to you as well. This idea of regenerative agriculture, because there's a lot of debate around the climate crisis, what to do, how much agriculture is part of the problem. We have monocropping. When it comes to this regenerative agriculture thing, I think you've spoken to a few people. I'm sure you talk about this in the film. I guarantee it's in there. I'd put all my money on it. But I guess have you had in the film about this subject?
We should have separate discussions on what is best for human health, and then how do we do that sustainably for the environment.
Right.
But because those could be separate, and we sometimes I think we do need to focus on human health first, right? And solve your own problem before we get to that. But luckily they are combined, and they are both, you know, they both work in the same way, and that's a natural synergistic effect of nature and how nature works. So it's no surprise. It's just kind of opposite of what the anti-meat community, the vegan activists would say. And so you can have your steak and eat it too, is you know, like the high level thing that I could say about this regenerative agriculture piece. It's that we can eat animal foods and have optimum human health and have an optimum environment. In fact, it's probably the only way we can have an environmental future that's sustainable, because monocropping and this stuff is not sustainable. It's almost by design not sustainable, because it's just taking from the system, and it's trying to use different inputs, synthetic inputs, to close the loop or try to, you know, keep it going. It's these fake fertilizers and monocrops and all this stuff. It is an unsustainable system, like by nature and by design. You know, it's like, how can we max out this square of land as much as possible, and not let's max out the nutrition and the soil and the soil health and that. And so that's what regenerative agriculture does. And that is, the last part of the film gets into that. And, you know, I've interviewed a bunch of amazing ranchers and soil scientists and all kinds of people. And I mean, there's finally some good research coming out. Some famous stuff is from White Oak Pastures that does things really well. And you can look up, they have some great graphics that go around the internet about how they put in more carbon into the soil than they give out. And that fake foods, you know, I think this graph, you know, these studies show that the Impossible Burgers, the Beyond Meat, even just like soybean protein or something, they all have a toll on the environment and carbon. And the well-raised animals on pasture, you know, cows moving around, cattle moving around, eating grass, drinking the water, getting sun, you know, this natural system, they put carbon back in the soil. And I mean, that's, like I said, that's the future. That's the only way that we can have a future. I mean, people try to hack nature, and there's a theory that we can make synthetic meat in a lab, and that's going to be better somehow. But I think that's fundamentally flawed. That you're going outside the system. So like, we need the animals on the grass. So they're not a burden to the environment. They're helping the soil. They're stimulating growth. They're doing all kinds of things. They're fertilizing with their manure. Like, this is part of the system. So even if we did have this magical, it's almost like alchemy, right? How are we going to make something out of nothing, right? It's like, okay, we're going to have this meat. Like, we're going to have all these proteins and amino acids and these amazing compounds that's in red meat. And we're going to somehow create that out of thin air. Well, where are these inputs coming from? They have to come from something. And I don't think we could ever, just through the laws of entropy or of the thermodynamics, how are we going to we can't create something out of nothing. So there will be inputs. There's electricity and cooling, you know, just to even keep it at the right temperature. And there's all these different antibacterial agents we need to put in. There's so much that would go into it. So even if we could, I mean, maybe we could get 99% there. It's like you can't go faster than the speed of light. I don't
Yeah.
think you can go better than what nature can do. So maybe we get 99% there. But we don't have cows or cattle, cow is a female cow. I keep saying cow, but colloquially known as cows, right?
Yeah.
We can't have cattle on grass that would help stimulate the soil. I mean, there's a whole nother rabbit hole in this. If people know of Alan Savory, you can watch his TED Talk and desertification and how putting animals back on the land is what would reverse desertification, and which is a big problem around the world when these big, land areas are turning into desert because they don't have animals on them. Once they put animals back on the lands, the grasses come back and nature comes back, and food is provided to these people who need it the most. This guy's mostly in Africa, Alan Savory. So yes, so even if we could have this magical alchemy meet, how would we have the healthy soil that we would need?
The whole system just isn't built very efficiently to run in 2021. It's just the broken paradigm. Like that's it. And so it's just really fascinating.
It is, and it's about energy, and the story should be about fossil fuels, or like what's actually contributing the pollution or whatever else, the CO2. And there's a lot of debates even about CO2 even, and what kind of problems. But I mean, who would say that it's good to just burn a whole bunch of fossil fuel and just throw it up in the atmosphere? I mean, it can't be good. So let's blame it on the real source of the problem, which is all the energy inputs that are outside of agriculture, or part of this old system of agriculture. And I don't know if I could throw some of these few high level facts out there about, like, it's the actual cattle is responsible for about 2.9% of the greenhouse gases. And then, bogus debunked movies like Cowspiracy that actually they based it on a study that was retracted because they did the study wrong. They were claiming that that cows are worse for the environment than transportation.
That's
they're worse than cars.
to me. That's insane.
It's just so absurd. It's so absurd. It's like these big industries, whether it's transportation or industry, is 89-90% of the problem. When you look at
the problem too is that these industries are, and this is what the food industry did. They shifted focus, like the whole cholesterol debate. The studies done by sugar companies focused it on cholesterol to keep it away from sugar so they could sell products. It's kind of the same way with the energy thing. It's like, and I'm not saying that this is like what is happening. I'm not in the know per se, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's like oil companies shifting the focus and like pushing it towards like, oh, it's the meat's the problem, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about all this other stuff. That I think the problem is the black and white fallacy. It's not black and white. Like none of these issues are black and white. And I think that's kind of where people need to realize it's more nuanced than black and white.
No, that's exactly it. And someone asked me I spoke at the Australian beef convention. I had to do it remotely. It was really sad. I couldn't fly out because the borders were closed.
Oh yeah.
And the host asked me at the end, like, why isn't this message being heard? It's basically what you're saying. Like, why do we hear the opposite message, and who's controlling this narrative? Like, what's going on? Like, if meat is healthy, then why do we only hear the opposite? And it is exactly that these big corporations are controlling the narrative because that's where the money is. So I break it down to the profits and the processing. This is one of my favorite little catchphrases that I'm putting in the film and going to do videos on and all this stuff, because I think it's just so important when you realize that the profits and the processing, well, really the unhealthiness comes from the processing too. So really the processing is everything. So not only does all the profit come from there, but all the unhealthiness comes from that processing. But what I'm saying is profits in the processing, if you take a chicken and you can get a chicken breast, and you could make, say the profit would be 20 cents on that chicken breast for the farmer. Or you could cover it in batter and flavorings and fake flavorings and vegetable oils and sell a bag of chicken nuggets in the freezer section. You could profit $2. So there's an order of magnitude more profit to just process it with the cheapest ingredients possible, the sugar, flour, oil. So you add 2 cents of sugar, flour, oil, and all of a sudden you made $2 profit. Okay, so now you have this giant profit. This is the entire food industry, all the big companies you heard of, all the fast food companies. This is the people, pharmaceutical companies even, which is not directly related to health, but kind of, this is the energy companies. This is every company. They're making money. They're funding studies. They're hiring lobbyists, and they're controlling the narrative. They're doing the marketing. Do you think beef farmers have money to do commercials? No, they pool all their money, and they've had one campaign in the last like 30 years. You know, that beef is what's for dinner. You know, some people probably don't even know what that is because it's an old ad campaign, and it's the only ad campaign that, you know, beef would have. So what's the opposite? Well, every single other advertisement in the world, which is for processed foods, all these things that make a ton of money. So if you have the profit, then you can control the narrative and spend money to do, like I said, studies, lobbying, marketing. So that's the inherent problem. Whole foods of any kind, plant or animal, don't have a profit margin. So you can't make money on them. So you can't, you know, spread the message. And so that's why the whole narrative is controlled. It's really simple. It's like, of course you haven't heard this, because they don't want you to hear about it.
Well, I mean, there's that age-old saying, follow the money. And if you follow the money, I think you'll find where the truth lies. And then the other problem is we just have kids today that just can't do math. I mean, our STEM testing is terrible. I know, Mom, you're out there, you're a great teacher, but I can't do math. I don't know what I'm doing. All those numbers that Brian was just saying over my head, but I trust him. That's what's key. Trust is a must. But I really appreciate taking the time. I mean, we could get into the weeds on so many things, but I really look forward to your film and all this other stuff you're working on. I'd like to kind of round this podcast out talking about some of the work you're doing with Mary Ruddock and some other people with Cows for Kids, because I think that's a really, really charitable organization that you're trying to do by helping people out and really returning to their roots when it comes to food. So maybe you could explain what your goals are with that and how people can help.
Yeah, we're still on Indiegogo. The campaign's ending in a few days. By the time this podcast comes out, hopefully it's not over. But we're really just grouping together money to go straight to buying animals for these different communities in Africa so they can get food. They can get animal nutrition. They need animal nutrition. We went to a Maasai school, and there was 3 classrooms, and it was so great. You know, they sang a song for us, and they're learning English. And then we went out to look at their food, and it was this little shed, and they had like a little packs of sugar. They had some little jugs of vegetable oil and a big, it was like a trash can of just corn flour. And that's all they had. So they were saying this is what they had to eat for the day. And then they could go home and, you know, get some good food. But for the whole day, that's all they had. And we were like, well, why? We can't afford cows. I mean, the teachers are volunteers. Like, if we had some cows, we could get some milk, and then we could put some milk in this porridge that they make out of those 3 ingredients. And so that's our whole goal, is just purchasing the cows. So it's a sustainable resource of milk that they can use year round, and the animals can multiply, and they can have, you know, milk in their food. And then maybe they could ditch the vegetable oil and the sugar. And I mean, corn flour, it's not the worst thing, but I mean, it's food at least. And so it's called ugali, and they make ugali out of either water and the corn flour, and they can put milk in it, and now it's nutritious. So that's the goal. It's on Indiegogo. You can go to cows4kids.com and click through there. But yeah, everyone's really excited about it. Mary has talked to the main guy with the Maasai people, and he's going to make a whole event out of it. He said he's going to get the media involved. He's like going to contact some, you know, news people, and we're going to go over there soon. Well, I'm not going to go over there. She might go over there to facilitate it, but we're going to get them some animals.
That's very exciting. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like, go back to the basics. Like, if you think about going back to the basics, I feel like so many people's lives could be forever changed. And it's just such an unfortunate situation that in 2021, we have this much health disparity. We can shoot a Tesla into space, but we can't fix people's diabetes. And we're telling people that you can't fix your diabetes, which is driving me nuts, because you can turn things around. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing, and the stuff you're doing with Mary and everyone else that you're working with. And I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff in the future. So keep doing that. If there's anywhere else people can find you, I mean, I know there's foodlies.org and your podcast, YouTube page, Food Lies, Instagram. Where else can people find you?
Sapien.org. That's kind of the main hub. Yeah, all those places. You just search Food Lies on any social media and I'll be there. I try to post every day and post, valuable content and information and all this stuff. And yeah, just search for Food Lies and go to sapien.org where everything else is linked.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Brian, for taking the time. I hope down the line, maybe after your film comes out, we can come and discuss it again after I watch it and just have my brain just blown by all this stuff that I probably already have been figuring out. But I look forward to it. The trailer's awesome, so it should be great.